Victor to encourage you. Again, thank you for doing the updates. What we have started practicing in our group on Wednesday nights, we open up the updates and we go through them one by one with the whole group. If people didn't have a chance to look at them, that's the chance to pray together and to know what our church is all about and what are the plans, our plans are. Ladies, thank you for sharing your experience in your trip to Greece. That was amazing. And I wonder, I didn't ask you, but have any of you cried there? Any of you both cried there because it was so hard? Maybe you did, and you probably wanted to go back home into your cozy bedroom and your house and your friends. But I wonder how many tears and cries did God hear from these refugees from Ukraine? Because these people, they suddenly had to leave their houses, their businesses, their relatives, their places. They had to run, take their kids and run to different countries, different languages, food. And now they have to survive. They have to figure out housing, friends, how to take their kids to school, in the school where there is a different language and they have no idea what they're teaching about. And mainly those refugees, they're single moms with children because husbands were not allowed to flee. And I wonder how many cries did God hear from the children and from these moms. And now we had an opportunity, right? God had our church a little bit bless those kids. Just allow them to spend 5 days in the camp where there would be care, love, where gospel would be presented, when they would be taught how to pray to God that they had no idea existed. To show love and to show God. And that's justice. Because we can see in the world there is a lot of injustice. We can see because of the sin, there are many cries in the world. And today's passage that we're going to look at, it's focused a lot about the righteousness and justice. We'll be thinking, we'll be learning of the godly righteousness and godly justice. And I would like to open the Bible with you. We'll be reading from Genesis. We continue read the story of Abraham and his relationship with God and his faith that is developed in God. And we'll be reading from verses 16 to 33, to the end of the chapter. So the context is Abraham accepted these foreigners. He accepted them. He saw 3 men who were walking, and he invited them and showed hospitality. And they spent time together. They had a feast. And now it says, the man got up from there and looked out over Sodom. And Abraham was walking with them to see them off. Then the Lord said, should I hide what I am about to do from Abraham? Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the ways of the Lord by doing what is right and just. This is how the Lord will fulfill to Abraham what he promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is immense, and their sin is extremely serious. I will go down to see if what they have done justifies the cry that has come up to me. If not, I will find out." Then man turned from there and went towards Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Abraham stepped toward and said, "Will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away instead of sparing the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people who are in it? You could not possibly do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. You could not possibly do that. Won't the judge of the earth, whole earth, do what is just?" The Lord said, "If I find 50 people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Then Abraham answered, "Since I have ventured to speak to my Lord, even though I am dust and ashes, suppose the 50 righteous lack 5. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? He replied, "I will not destroy. If I find 45 there," well, I guess God can count, right? He said lack 5, and God says 45. Then he spoke to him again, "Suppose 40 are found there." He answered, "I will not do it on account of 40. Then he said, "Let my Lord not be angry, and I will speak farther. Suppose 30 are found there." He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." Then he said, "Since I have ventured to speak to my Lord, suppose 20 are found there." He replied, "I will not destroy it on account of 20. Then he said, "Let my Lord not be angry, and I will speak one more time. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, "I will not destroy it on account of 10. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place. It's a very interesting passage that we read that basically shows us this conversation between Abraham and Lord, where Abraham learns the justice of God, his ways, how he responds, how he expects people to live in justice and righteousness. Why should we care about justice? How much do we think about justice? And I think today's message is going to make us think about it even more. Because we usually like things to be fair when we're looking at ourselves, when we're comparing ourselves to somebody else. But are we caring for the justice? For the justice for other people? Not to have things as others have, to have it fair for ourselves. Why do we care about justice? Because God does care about justice. When we speak about justice, we have to begin from God, with God, because He is the righteous, and He reveals His righteous people about His plans, righteous plans. And we need to realize that God, He is just and righteous. Before the earth was created, God was righteous and just. That's who He is. That's His character. And He is not corrupt. It's the worst thing to have a judge who is corrupt or who is changing his convictions. But God is not like that. And He's never changing. He always the same. And God, in His justice and righteousness, He created the world. And the way how He created the world, He wanted to operate in righteousness and justice. The way how He created the world, where there would be no conflicts between people and God, when there would be no conflicts between people, people would not abuse each other, and where there would be no conflict between people and creation, where the animals would be taken care of, where there would be peace and justice and righteousness. That's how the world was created. And when God created the world, people enjoyed this righteousness and justice. They loved it. They enjoyed it. And relationships were great between God and between people and creation. So it's a divine standard. When we talk about the justice and righteousness, that's his standard. That's who he is, and that's how he has created everything. Right? He wanted to have love and compassion and respect, but sin made things unjust and wicked. The injustice started to take place in the life of the history of the humankind when the sin happened. So with the fall, sin entered in God's good creation. And sin broke our relationship with God and with each other, and with creation as well. Now we have this injustice and unrighteousness that surrounds us. So when we look at the injustice, we need to realize that this is not the standard. This is not the desire of God. When we see the cries and tears and brokenness, this is not God's standard. He is for the justice. I want to show you the picture of this Lady Justice. You probably have seen it. This is the goddess, by the way, Roman goddess, that represents the human justice. This lady, she is presented as bifold. In one hand, she has scale, and in another hand, she has sword. So what it symbolizes that the justice, human justice, needs to be done without passion or prejudice. It has to be without impartiality, and the sword symbolizes the power. But we need to realize that God's justice and human justice is two different things. And if we go from the culture to culture, we can find that each people, they have their own justice system. Because justice system is based on the law of the land. Justice is based on the law. And each land, people of the land, they can have their own law that will be used to keep the justice. And we can see that usually human justice or human laws, they're not on the matter, decided on the matter of what is right or wrong, but usually what feels like right. What will give us comfort. That's how the laws are created. And then according to those laws, the justice is going to be exercised. We can see some laws that legalizing drugs, and justice will be exercised based on the law. Legalizing abortion, same-sex marriage, right to choose your gender, it's the law. And that's how it's going to be, justice is going to be exercised according to the law of the land. But is this the justice? Will it stop the cry of the people? Cry because of the sins, of the abuse. Will it stop? No, it will not. Human justice is not the same as God's justice. His justice is perfect and true. So what does God do with people who are surrounded by this injustice? and tears and abuse, God initiates the redemption. He initiates the plan to begin with calling the Abraham. He's the one from whom he's going to create the whole nation that will know the true justice and righteousness. And now he's speaking with Abraham, and he's presenting this dilemma of these two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, that are wicked cities. In Old Testament, when we read the Old Testament, we may read a lot of people who are called righteous. And we wonder, by what definition are they righteous? And usually in the Old Testament, the righteous people are the people who are in a covenant with God. Those people who are broken by the sin, yes, but then they have this covenant with God, they have a relationship with God, and when they start following God and believing God, God calls them righteous. Because their focus and their life is after God Himself, and God is calling them righteous. People who are in a relationship with God and then obediently are in the process of changing. Their system of thinking, their transformation of their heart is happening. Abraham, he was called into these relationships. So we see the story of Abraham. He was called to have the intimate relationship with God. And as a result, as one of the properties for the people who are called to be with God, we need to realize what God's justice is, what God's righteousness is. And if we read what God is saying about Abraham in the verses 18, 19, it says, "Then the Lord said, 'Should I hide what I am about to do from Abraham?' Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him, for I have chosen him, so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord." And what is this way of the Lord? By doing what is right and just. So he was called out from many of these people who have no idea what the justice is and righteousness is and who God is. He calls Abraham, and now God says, "I'm going to teach you what my righteousness and justice is. And I want you to understand, to realize what my justice is, not human justice, and then teach the next generation of your people what is God's justice is and what is righteousness is. And by you understanding this righteousness and justice, by you practicing it in your life, by you living out this will of God, you will be influencing those people who live on their own justice, as if you can call. You will be influential. So God is calling him, first of all, to be just. And that's the result of the calling. That's the foundation. Of the calling is the foundation. And now he expects from Abraham to be just and follow the will of God. The second thing, as we said, he expects him to teach the justice. He wants believers, true believers, to understand what the justice of God is and then be able to teach it. Teach it to the children, teach it to some new believers who are coming to this covenant. We need to be able to teach the justice of God. We need to know what justice of God is. And then to bless others with true justice. Not with the justice that comes from the desire of sinful desires, but true justice that is how it was created at the beginning. Only by God's justice and God's righteousness, lives are going to be changed. Family are going to be changed. Nations are going to be changed. And in this conversation about destroying this city, Abraham, he learns about the justice of God. He learns a lot about justice of God. What does God want us to understand? What are the lessons? We need to understand that justice is the characteristic of God that we worship. In order for us to worship true God, fully worship God, we need to learn what God's justice is, how He acts, who He is, truly to enjoy our God and worship who He is for who He is. And God's justice is about putting to right all that is wrong in creation. God's justice, He is bringing everything back to the original, how He has created everything. And that's His justice. That's His work. That's what He's all about. And we need to realize that that's what He pursues. And His justice is active. That's what He does. And He continues to do. Because God is just, we can trust Him. We can trust Him in any circumstances or events that are happening. God is in control, and He is just. He's pursuing this goal. He's bringing everything back to the original. And even if our prayers are not answered in the manner we expect them to be answered, we can still trust God because He's just and righteous. We can trust Him because we worship Him, because He is about the justice, and He will not let injustice go, and He cannot act unjustly. So we can see that besides the revelation that God has given about the to the believers about His justice and His righteousness, we can see in this passage that He gives the revelation about His investigation of Sodom's wickedness. In this conversation, He reveals things to Abraham that he had no idea. Yes, he heard that they were doing stuff, but he wasn't aware what God did, what He knew. Why were the reasons of this destruction were legit reasons. And God revealed that Sodom is a wicked city, unjust city, without even 10 righteous people. So this whole city with many people, and there are less than 10 who receive God as their God, who trust God, who have fellowship with God. So this whole city is full of people, and Jesus reveals that He hears cries of injustice. Constantly, He hears cries of people about unpunished sins. And God has a deep concern for protection of these people, to make a justice, to come and bring everything right where the justice is broken, where the sin is, when the abuse is happening. And He is concerned, and He has compassion for these people who are hurting. As well, He has a compassion for the people who are foolish, who are abusive. But there is a limit, right? And God does detailed investigation. He does it openly and personally. He comes and experiences it. And He wants Abraham to realize in all of this process that God is not reacting in wrath or in anger to any situation or any injustice. He is diligent, thought through, experiencing, thinking of many, many opportunities, how this can be done differently. And at the end, He does justice. If He finds unjust, if He finds people with desire no change to any change, as a judge, He proclaims the verdict. he makes justice. Throughout the history and today, God hears of all the cries that are happening, abuses, and there are constant crying for help. If you don't cry, it doesn't mean that nobody else cries. There is a constant cry for help because of the injustice and abuse. And God is against abuse. He's against slavery. He's against sex trafficking. He's against hunger. He's against orphans. He's against abortion. He hears cries of unjust actions. And there is a limit to unjust living. We need to realize that God, He is not waiting always to the eternity for the grand judgment. He can judge people here and now. And this judgment that God has prepared for the Sodom is the judgment now. And they deserve it. And He has all the rights to make it right. We need to realize that God is of justice. He's also the God of mercy. And He would spare the city if there were at least 10 righteous people. He would give another opportunity. And this city, they had many opportunities. They had Lot, righteous Lot, who lived righteous life, and Lot had children that proclaimed probably about God. Abraham, a little bit back in the story, he saved king and all these people from the captivity of stronger kings. And in conversation, he shared his faith in God, in real God. They heard it. They lived with righteous people, but they have not changed. And moreover, they even influenced the family of Lot. Because as we read the story farther, we'll see that not all of the family would run before destruction. Some of them would stay there. So there was no hope for these people, for the city. And the justice had to be done. The lesson we can learn, we need to realize the reality of God's judgment. Hell exists, and it reminds us of true judgment. Even though we don't see any judgment right now to the wicked people who live without God, it doesn't mean there is going to be no judgment. It doesn't mean there is going to be no judgment, because our God, He is the judge, righteous. And we need to realize, if you are not in a relationship with God, you are not justified. If you don't have a covenant with God, you are not righteous. So the judgment is going to be on you, and the punishment is going to be great. And it doesn't matter how moral you are, how good you are, but if you don't have a relationship with God, the just God is going to judge you. That you live this life in His kingdom without any relationship with Him, but thinking all about yourself and taking advantage of the things that God has given you. Abraham didn't even realize that time of judgment is real for the city down below. He had feast with these strangers, right? He enjoyed life. But in one day, the whole city is going to be destroyed. He didn't realize that time has come. And sometimes we think that the judgment is so far away, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. So there is a great need for the righteous people to influence wicked people, to live, to teach, to bless with the good news. This missionary trip was a great opportunity to bless these kids with the gospel, with a true justice, with a true person who is just and righteous and who loves them. And they introduced this covenant or this relationship that can happen with this God, amazing God. We have a great need to teach our kids about true relationship with God. We as the parents, we should not neglect or think that judgment is going to happen. It's not going to happen to our kids. Just because they're in our house, just because they're in the church here, just they are justified. No. God justifies only those who have true faith in Him and who have true relationship with Him. And He will judge all unbelievers who are not justified. In 1994, in Africa, there is a country that is called Rwanda. And in 1994 happened great genocide, and many people were killed. So majority of the East Central African nation, they're members of the Hutu, they murdered as many as 800,000 of minorities, which are called Tutsi. Can you imagine the cry? This was injustice done, killing, just because you're of a different nation. They were killing them. And after all of this killing, founder of International Gospel Ministry, IGM, he came there just to help find out who those people were, their names, whereabouts, who they are, just to keep memory of them, at least to keep the memory of them. And he would walk and collect remains just to bring them together somehow. And as he was doing this, collecting remains and trying to figure out all the data, he constantly would ask, where was God when this happened? Where was just God when this happened? And he would ask these questions day after day. But then, whereas the answer came to him in a different question. And the answer was, the question sounded like, where were righteous people when this happened? Where were righteous people when this happened? In the city of Sodom, there was less than 10 righteous people. Why? For such a long time, people would respond for such a long time as if it was kept secret. The righteousness of God, the judgment of God. What kind of lessons can we learn from this? From God's revelation about the wickedness of people, of His judgment, true judgment, we need to realize that we're surrounded by the poverty, inequality, and violence. And we are, as the people of God's people, we are to do justice. Not only to understand justice of God, not only to live it out in our community, the justice of God, we as the church are called to bless nations. That's what Abraham was called. Not only to pass on to his generation, he was supposed to bring God to other people, influence other people, show the true righteousness and true justice that brings peace and harmony to the humans. And we are, as the church, we are called to bless nations, to proclaim God's justice and His good news that He has. We see in this passage that Lord, he encourages Abraham to be part of this plan. Even though this is harsh, even though it's hard for the Abraham, but he wants him to be involved. We have to go through these just decisions with God. And we need to have the intercession for the people. God himself, he is a compassionate God. And he loves compassionate believers who love people, who wants the justice of God to be brought into people's lives, who want to be involved in the salvation of the unrighteous and righteous as well in any circumstances. God uses angels in his plan, but he invites people, those who are called. And Abraham, when he speaks with God, and the questions that he asks God, what's interesting that God already has the answers. Abraham thought that in his prayers or in his doubts or in his challenges to God about his righteousness, he thought that maybe he can give him an idea. Maybe there is something else that God didn't think of. But we see that God thought of everything. He thought of how to save Lot and his two daughters. He thought of a way. He counted all the righteousness, all the righteous people, and he knows all the details of wicked hearts, of people who are unwilling to change. Was Abraham's intercession in vain? Has he failed? No. He prayed for righteousness. He prayed for righteous. And his prayer was focused on God, who is able to change. Lesson for us. We need to realize that many godly people prayed a lot. Our prayer has to be filled not only with asking stuff for our own protection. Prayer needs to contain worship to God. Our prayer needs to be filled with petitions, thanksgiving, and a lot of intercessions for the people who are in unjust situations. And the last point I want to bring from this passage, that justifying faith leads to justice. It's not the other way around. Not our own justice will justify us or give us faith, because there are two camps, two religions. One religion will proclaim, by your own moral activity, by your own justice, how you think the life should be, you will achieve God's favor. No. You will never be justified by your own justice. It's the other way around. It's the people who have found mercy in God's eyes and justified because they have believed. Now they learn how to be just. Justice is the fruit of the justification. In the Old Testament, if the Jew was not concerned with the poor, immigrants, widows, it meant something deeply wrong with his heart as a believer. It means that he has no relationship with God and there is no justification if he has no fruit of caring for the poor, widow, and immigrants. If we read Isaiah 58, it's the chapter of the fasting. So the Jew comes before God, worshiping God, and he wants to have a relationship with God. And he has a question, why have we fasted but you have not seen? We have denied ourselves, but you have not noticed. What's wrong? What's wrong with our religion, with our life? And God answers, you look, you do as you please on that day of your fast. And oppress all your workers. You fast with contention and strife to strike victoriously with your fist, viciously with your fist. You cannot fast as you do today, hoping to make your voice heard on high. God is God of justice. And He looks at us, how do we relate with people? That's why the prayer that the Lord is teaching us, forgive our sins as we forgive sins of others. That's the true justice. When God redeems His people, He wants us to practice the justice and the righteousness. Deuteronomy has this passage where God demands for the Israelites not to abuse aliens. If there are immigrants coming into the tent, into their camp, they need to provide to them and be caring for them, because Israelites, they were slaves themselves. They were one time in despair and slavery and hopeless. And now for the righteous person who is justified, he needs to see those people and bring love and care. That's the fruit of being justified. Now you become just. Not only you have full plate of food, now you bring and share with others. That's the just action. In the New Testament, Jesus comes Himself to do justice. And His first words that He was reading from Isaiah was proclamation that He comes to do justice. He comes to find those who cry. He comes to find those who are rejected and neglected and abused. Jesus, that's who He is. That's who our God is. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim and release to the captives. Proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind. To set free the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Jesus Himself, He came to die for our deeds of injustice. And today we're celebrating this death of Jesus Christ because He has died for our deeds of injustice. There had to be done something with our works against righteousness. He took the punishment and through faith granted us His justice and righteousness. And now we're walking in His medals of His righteousness and His justice. That's the way of life now for us. Jesus, when He was teaching His disciples, He warned them about Pharisees who have neglected justice. And He would say in Mark 12:38, beware of the scribes who want to go around in long robes and who want greetings in the marketplace, the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and say long prayers just for the show. These will receive harsher judgments. Justified people, they become just. They notice hurts. They come to the people who are hurt. First church in Acts described as people who had sell their possessions and they brought it before apostles to share among the poor. And then later on there was a conflict because the widows of the Greek widows were not supported as well as the Jewish widows. And what did the church decide? Prayerfully, they dedicated deacons so that the justice would prevail. So the first church, they experienced this justice of God and they started to live this life of justice. One of the signs of the newborn believer is his response to the needy, poor, abused, orphans, widows, immigrants in response of care, love, and compassion. If we think that everything is all right with us, and we don't notice needy, and we don't practice justice, it's a huge question. How come there is no fruit of my justification? How come there is no justice that I act with? James 1:27 says, if anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, so he abusing other people with his speeches, with his tongue, and he thinks that he's religious, his religion is useless, and he deceives himself. Pure and undefiled religion before God the Father is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. The true religion is to live life righteously, understand the justice of God, but then use this justice to bring it to the poor and needy in the form of care and love. Lessons to learn. God has chosen us, and we responded in faith, and He restores us to be merciful, to practice justice and righteousness. He wants us to love His justice, realize that His true justice exists. He wants us to be a person of His will, so we'll live our life according to His will, where we deny ourselves and where we love Him and love others. That's the fruit of the regenerate person. What kind of convictions do we need to have? We need to have one of the convictions: God is the righteous judge. If we saw God with many other titles and descriptions of His character, today God is speaking to us and saying, I'm the just God. I know everything, and my judgments are just. So whatever is happening, I'm in control, and my judgments are just. We need to realize that, another conviction, that righteousness exalts the nation. The more righteous there are people in a nation, the better off the nation is going to be. Next one, righteous people, they preserve society. That's the truth of God. Because God, He loves when the righteousness is growing. What kind of applications can we use from this text? One of the applications is justified believers must live righteously before the Lord in order to enjoy His benefits. In order for us to be blessed and be a blessing to others, we need to realize and practice justice and righteousness, because that's how God has created everything, and He's willing to bless. Justified believers must teach righteousness and justice to their children. That's one thing that we have to pass on to the next generation. There is a true righteousness and justice. Believers are to pray according to God's will or His plan. And the last, believers must intercede for people in their prayers, as well as practice justice towards weak. Let us stand and pray. Heavenly Father, we come to You and we can freely dedicate our lives in this peaceful trust that You're in control and You know every details. If we're going to have questions for certain situations that's going on, or cries or abuse, You have already the answers for us. And we can trust You that everything is under control of Your loving hand and Your wisdom. And Lord, as You have called us now, You want us to teach this righteousness and justice, so we would be ourselves practice justice and righteousness So you would be pleased looking at our deeds, our thoughts, how we spend money, how we spend time. You would be pleased in our relationship with other people that surround us, that we bring justice, that we see the needs of others and we sacrifice and we lay down our lives and hearts to bless others. Lord, there are a lot of cries in this world, in our nation, in our city, abused, neglected, hopeless, dying, without hope. Lord, connect us with those people because you want to bring justice. You want to bring hope to them. And we want to be your hands in this plan that you do. Lord, teach us how to pray diligently for righteous and for unrighteous. Lord, we come to you as our teacher, as the one who has called Abraham. And you spent so much time with him, bringing his faith so that it would grow, it would mature. And Lord, we trust that you will mature us as well as Living Word Bible Church, that you will not let us be satisfied only by this experience of blessing because now we know the justice and we practice it among ourselves, but be the salt of the world, be the light of the world. And Lord, bring us people who are in need, either that's immigrants or abused or lonely. Lord, let us cry with those who cry. Let us care for those who are in need. And we present ourselves for your glory because we want to do justice. We want to bring what is broken. Lord, we praise you for who you are and what you do. In the name of Jesus.